Hi, I'm Michael Koehn. I'm the founder of the CannSolve Clinic and a practitioner working in cannabis. Today I'll be talking about a deep dive into mental health and the focus on how treating pain requires an understanding of how people are thinking and feeling. My goal today is to help practitioners to better understand how to use cannabinoid-based tools to improve the health and well-being of patients.
I am so honored to be introducing Michael Koehn, who's going to be our next speaker. And obviously, we've been hearing about him all today. He's done such a wonderful job of organizing this event. And I know how near and dear this is to him. I asked him, well, what are you going to do tomorrow? Like what's going to happen? And he said, I'll probably watch some of these episodes or the speakers over again, because he lives really for this. And ever since I met him, like, just such a beautiful human. And I've been so inspired by the work he does. One thing that comes to mind is when I first asked him about cannabis and his ideas about cannabis and how we can use it in this, for different patients and for communities, and this concept of healing he describes, and I'm sure he'll go into it, dogs with jobs. And I love his analogies that he uses. It really crystallizes in my mind how this can work at even a higher level than just one person individually. But just to give you a little bit more of a background, he is a registered clinical counselor with 20 years experience in medical cannabis. He co-founded the Welcome Back MRI in 2008 and Pain Management Center, installing Canada's only dynamic multi-positional MRI scanner, combined with an interdisciplinary medical assessment and treatment team. In 2012, he created Mind Team Solution, a mental health agency that specializes in the complex work of helping motor vehicle accident victims to restore their quality of life and function. And more recently, he's partnered with a team of physicians, nurses, and educators to launch the CannSolve Clinic, which we've been hearing and seeing a lot about today. So it's a new medical approach focusing on providing patients with personalized cannabinoid medicine. And again, I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm sure you've all been enjoying this. And so I look forward to hearing about Michael's talk.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Wow, really appreciate everybody still here working hard this late in the day. So I'm going to turn up the energy a little bit here. We got a fire hose of information, so I hope you're ready to go, because I think people want to know, how does this all come together? Today's topic is going to be a little bit about the clinical way that you use cannabis. Actually, if you were in our clinic, how would we do this? And I thought, let's dive right in. Quickly, I just want to let you know, I work in the industry. I have a cannabis clinic. I'm connected to most of the lawful producers, either through a handshake, and occasionally we do exchange some money. So I just want to be really clear about that when you work in this regulated system, you have above board, disclosed, explained relationships where, yes, we do exchange some money so I can pay my staff and we can carry on going. But I'll tell you, as a business model, we run super lean and we put all of our money back into making sure that we have greater access. For that reason, we operate a $0 clinic. Anybody can refer to us. We put no barriers in place, and we focus on getting people help, because we know when people are suffering with pain and mental health, you need help and you need it now. You don't need barriers and you don't need excuses and you don't need reasons why you can't. So we do our very best to help as many people as we possibly can. What a wonderful city we live in. Really, really an honor to be surrounded by so many incredible people here. And just a quick shout out to Kamloops, and what a wonderful community we have here, because we do, and we've got great people. So really, really love the folks in my community here. Very briefly, I've been in this industry about 20 years. Started off working with, unfortunately, tragedy and seeing on firsthand experience when a person is dying, and you have access to what we traditionally call sort of the gray market, black market, just buying from the streets. I was able to help my loved one to improve her ability to live while she was coping with the most profound and horrible form of multiple sclerosis you can imagine. They pulled out all the stops, and back in 2001, they were willing to authorize cannabis right at the beginning. Tells you how terrible things were at the time. But she was a great teacher and taught me so much about what fuels my work here today and why I'm so passionate. And I have no questions whatsoever that we need to work harder to help people who are suffering. All right. Really, really clear. I think it's important that we start with a shared agenda. My agenda is this. My goodness, don't we need this to heal our world? And I believe we do it by healing each other, by helping those that are the most vulnerable to be able to get the help they need, so we can bring people back in our communities, we can welcome them back, and we can assist them to have a life again when either injury or disease or some unforeseen incident has taken them away from a place where they used to live and love and be a part of this and mattered, and it was lost. It can happen to any of us on a given day, and those people are near and dear to my heart, and they're the reason why we never ever stop working. You're gonna see this next slide out of order. This is gonna be my fun part. Number 2, objectives. Here's what we're gonna work on here. We're gonna do number 1, there we go. We're gonna highlight some of the risks and challenges for people that are insufficiently supported. I believe a lot of patients are doing their best to live better, to feel better, but the question is, how do they do that when maybe they're not getting the support that they need, or not enough support? So I want to talk a little bit about that, about cannabis stigma, and why it's really important to address that with patients, because it really affects care. I want to talk second about helping the healthcare practitioners, everybody here in the room who's saying, well, how do I do this at a higher level, and how do I do it quickly, because I'm busy and I got a lot going on and I'm struggling with the overwhelming complexity of cannabis. And I'm saying, honestly, I can break it down to 3 things for you, and I'm going to show you how we do that. And third here, I want to talk about clinical best practices and actually why cannabis alone just may not be enough, and why it's not a panacea, and why we're not here to just say, hey, more cannabis is the answer. We've already talked a little bit about that today, that it needs to be very skillful and very intentional in how we do this, and that's an important piece. Now, I know that we actually learn best when there's something inside of a story that really reaches us. And I know that when I'm working with patients, every one of their stories strikes a deep chord in me. And sometimes it's a little tough because of how much it is there. But today, I have something of incredible importance to share with you. We're going to talk a little bit today by going into the evidence, but doing so from the patient perspective. And we're going to go and have an opportunity here to go into a deep dive into a person severely affected by a motor vehicle accident who was written off medically, functionally. This person did not have a future and represents some of our worst fears in medicine when we are trying to work with people in the clinic. So I'm actually going to get a chance to show you a case study today where you're going to get to hear from the patient themselves. I've got their permission to share their medical records, to share their medical reports, to share their own words, their own story, and their impact. And I think that's why where rubber meets the road, where we realize the why behind everything you're hearing today. The why is this. I'd like to introduce you to a person near and dear to me, a fellow named Luke Grunert, who came to my practice following a motorcycle accident. I'll let you tell him. He'll tell you himself. Right?
My name is Luke Grunert. I'm here because I'm a medical cannabis user and I suffer from chronic pain. I have chronic migraine headaches and neck pain and shoulder pain. It stems from a car accident that happened in 2012. After my accident, I worked for just over 3 years. At that point, my body had deteriorated to the point where I couldn't work anymore and I had completely fallen apart. At that point, I ended up meeting up with Michael as a counselor who helped me get my life back on track. And then over the next couple years, we started working with medical cannabis and found a regimen that works with me and got me off all pharmaceuticals and really turned things around, not only physically, but also my personal life with my wife and my kids as well.
Just removing myself from the situation with as much THC as possible was the only way that I could cope. And it wasn't working. I was very suicidal at the time. When I first started working with cannabis with Mike, I was a heavy THC user. Heavy. $600 a month was my budget, and I would run out every single month. And I wasn't getting any better, I was only getting worse.
We have the absence of any perceived hope for improvement. And that is the suicidality line right there. Because if I can work with a person and I can see that things are getting better no matter how small, no matter which symptom we're working on, no matter what we're doing, if we see progress, we have hope. But for a person like Luke, that did not exist, and it resulted in a desire and a plan. He was ready to take his life. He had selected the shell. He showed me the Winchester shell and offered it to me. Would you like to take this after we were out of the dark? And I said, no. You're going to go to the shooting range. You're going to shoot that shell, and you're going to bring me back the empty one. I don't want the potential of what this shell is, and I don't have a firearms license, so I probably shouldn't have it. But I only want to see this as a life saved. I don't want to see the potential of how this could take your life. But a very powerful moment when you've got a person in front of you asking for help, and you know they have the bullet, and this person had full intention to use it. All right, let's hear in Luke's own words what this reality was like.
I went from being a journeyman electrician and a commissioning technician, which is basically we're the mediators between the electricians and the engineers, to I can't even take care of my kids anymore. So I kind of fell apart. I got to the point where my marriage was essentially over. My kids didn't want to see me, and then that's when I met Mike.
See, that's it. And that's why we're here. It's because I honor all of you, because I know this is the kind of situation you're faced with too. But here we got a wonderful man, talented, skilled, smart, a dad to 2 little girls, husband, part of our community, lost. You could hear it in his voice there. He just choked when he realized just where he was at, and the fact that his 2 lovely girls didn't even want to spend time with him. Really, really, really tough place. Which, by the way, when he says that's when I met Michael, that's my entire practice. I'm off the grid, and the only reason that you'll find my number and do that is because someone was worried that that's the state you're at. So obviously it's all hands on deck, and let's get to work when somebody shows up like that. So here's the question. I mean, could we switch to strategic use of medical cannabis to help him generate a better outcome? You're hearing today about folks that are very talented in this industry who've done the research and do the work every day, but they're doing it strategically. I mean, these aren't people just randomly prescribing things or trying to do it without information like Luke was. Could we improve it? All right, I promised practitioners I'd give you a really, really simple test to find out whether or not you've got a person in the intentional use market, because I don't use recreational and I don't use medical. I think it's nonsense. I think there's people that use cannabis intentionally. They know what it is. They know what they're doing. They're very skilled in paying attention to details. And they know what works and why. Or if you've got someone like Luke, who was just sort of just trying whatever he could, but it's not intentional to spend a lot of money on something that's not working. As a cannabis breeder, I focus on dogs with jobs. So I like every cannabis strain that I breed to have a very specific idea of what it does. So for example, if you need to function during your day and you need relief from anxiety, but you cannot be functionally impaired. Well, I bred a particular cannabis strain, a dog that I really love. I named it after my son, actually. And I call it Gunner's Gift, because that's what my son would want for the world. Relief from pain, relief from mental suffering, but he wouldn't want people impaired. So it's very important that when we're using the cannabis formulations, that we work with people who understand those formulations. You can learn them too. They're all dogs with jobs. And when they're used appropriately, we treat the symptom clusters like any medication we would be using from the pharmacy. It's just important that we go to the evidence, but it's an art and a science. And that's why when Dr. Mitchell was talking about, he's like, I have a staff, I have a team around me who all help to do that. It's because it takes a team. I don't think anybody can really do this so much on their own. You need help to decipher what those formulas are. But the good news is the licensed producers will help. They have a vested interest in you understanding their products as well and how to use them and use them appropriately. Legalization's done one good thing, is that it's brought information and accurate information into law. Licensed producers are mandated to make sure the information is consistent and it's accurate so that we can base our medical formulations upon the second part of the equation, which is good factual data. So it's really important that you take some time. And the way we do that is real simple. It's like auditioning for a job. And that's kind of how we do this. You start with a product that you feel may be a good fit based on your experience, and you ask a person to run like they're going to hire them for a job. It's like probation. So we're going to start off on our CBD oil at this dose for this long. And at the end of it, if you like it, well, hire it, put it on staff, put it in your toolkit, and learn about which dog does what job. so that you can start to build your own toolkit to go after each of the symptom clusters in a self-managed format. But make sure you understand what they are and how they work, because once a patient gets some success with one symptom and they realize, I can do this, well then slowly, like Dr. Mitchell said, don't hurry in getting off your medications. Stabilize first. We stabilize with mental health first. We don't go after pain. That's not a great way to go about it. So we focus instead on this treat the treatable approach, where we go for the right formulation, go for the symptom clusters, start to see an effect, take your time, warm up slow, commit. Okay? The third part, critically important. The reason why we don't see a lot of success for people that are under-supported with cannabis, that don't have good clinical support, guidance, is because they're missing the do part. The do is where it's always cannabis plus. Why were you taking cannabis in the first place? So you could sit on the couch? I really don't think that was the plan necessarily. I mean, maybe you needed a rest, and that's okay. We can say that. But the idea behind it is to pair cannabis up with whatever the thing is that you want to restore in your life. If it's going for a walk with your kids, your wife, your dog, whatever you want to do, great. Use your cannabis. Get up, get out there, manage your symptoms, and go live. Because it's the loss of the life, of the identity, of doing the things that matter that causes so much of the suffering and loss. We want to restore that, but it's restoring by doing. Now, I know there's some biomechanical practitioners here as well, which I love you guys for the work that you do in activation. But can you imagine if your patients had the ability to do effective symptom management that did not functionally impair them, and they would move into the activity, and they would comply, and they would commit to the biomechanical therapies? Wow, how many of you deal with, they'd love to, but they say it's too much in symptoms, too much pain. I didn't sleep well. I'm too anxious. And so they get this, not representative benefit from the hard work that a lot of you do. So I sympathize with you, but I want you to know that built into the formula with cannabis is biomechanical activation principles. They're right there in the third part of the equation, and they're critically important to the functional framework. So you can ask a patient first, really quick, check. All right, let's see, think. What are you doing to treat your cannabis? What's treating? I don't know, I don't feel well. Okay, are we there on the think part? No, let's dive into that. What would success look like for you? Let's get them to spell it out. That's our thinking part. Then we look, what cannabis formulation are we looking to provide that will help them with that particular outcome they'd like? And then the doing part, let's get some sort of experiment in behavior going where you use the cannabis and then you get up and you go and you do the thing. And we record some data on it and see, how are you doing? But remember, it's commitment. We don't try it once, well, then we can't do it. No, it's commitment, it's change. Your body and your mind didn't change to this state overnight. It did it over days, months, weeks, years of suffering. That's training. We gotta work against the conditioning and the training through activity. Really super important. So, I gotta do a quick shout out to Dr. McCallum here, because honestly, her work and her paper just totally changed my professional career, and it provided for me the focal point I needed to feel confident in walking into the clinical situation and saying, do I have the research and the literature behind me? And I'm like, yes, I do, because I studied it, and I'm so thrilled because there's such an absolute lack of good research that says, by the way, we're talking about dosing today, about clinical use, and in a more broad sense to provide more of a framework. And for this, it was really three things. We got to improve those symptoms there. We've got to improve function. And if we do the first two right, chances are we also have a subsequent improvement of quality of life. Now, another way to say that is hope. And that's the starting point. It certainly was for me to take it to the next place. So some of the things that we paid attention to with Luke. Take a look here. Medical cannabis patients, in contrast to those recreational users, frequently use CBD predominant chemivars. Smallest amount of THC, greatest improvement, symptom control, function, quality of life, and the fewest adverse events. So really important when we get it right, we don't have those AEs or adverse events that scare people. I like to be super underwhelming when we start cannabis, where you're like, okay, I've been doing this, I'm not really seeing any change. I go, yes! Because it didn't scare you, it didn't freak you out. If you took the first dose and you went, what is this crazy stuff? I failed you as a practitioner. So just like a rheostat, you know, in the dining room when you want to turn up the brightness of that light that we rarely sit under when we eat those meals. Well, the truth is you can start at the no light or almost no light and just imagine yourself oh so gradually turning that wheel up until you go, that's the right light for me. Somehow you know when to stop the wheel, and it's probably somewhere less than full brightness, but you know what's right for you, but you got to start. And that approach is super helpful. In addition to that, chronic conditions, we got to get into those long-acting oral preparations as the mainstay of treatment. It's incredibly important to look at chronic pain and suffering as more of a ongoing kind of thing. It's a 24/7 thing. I ask people with chronic pain, so do you get a break between, like, say, 5 and 7 p.m.? Does it just kind of like, I'll see you back in a couple hours? No, obviously not. But here's the thing. Does the treatment program match the symptom duration? If you are suffering 24/7, are we treating you for 8 hours? Okay. Important to pay some attention to that. Long-acting oral preparation is really good. CBD, we use lots of that to balance the THC side effect. That daytime use or driving, these types of things, I've got to be very careful about functional impairment. I told you activation is my key. I really want to get people moving and doing, and if they're doing that, it's not going to be very good if I've got you all impaired. Every so often a person might need that impairment, so I'm not opposed to it, but primarily we're trying to keep people highly functional and minimizing that impairment aspect. Again, the paper goes into great discussion on it. I encourage you all to read it. All right. Well, the good news is I told you Luke actually did come on board with the clinical guidelines and did agree to change his ways. So he got the old program out, and how did it go?
And at that point I said, you know what, Mike, I'm going to try this CBD you've been bugging me for a year and a half about. And that's when my THC content plummeted. My budget now is $200 a month, and I spend most of that on CBD products. Because with THC, I had no life. It just wiped out my days. My alarm would go off so I could walk down to the school to get my kids, because otherwise I would forget, because I didn't know what time it was. My day was just a blur. And that's not function. So that's kind of where I got with THC.
So you can see a tremendous change immediately that we're now down to the Health Canada standards. He's using $200 a month, gets him down to closer to around a gram and a half of cannabis usage per day, predominantly CBD, no longer chasing that side of things. So really important to see the changes in there. But there's some stuff we got to talk about here, transitioning, and why it's important to pay attention to these things. Really, we got to start by evidence. If people are suffering and you try to introduce something new or different, it's very difficult to encourage them if they don't see evidence. So I tell people, I want to generate some evidence with you. Is that okay if that's part of our treatment program, that we let our evidence guide you? And this is why also in Dr. McCallum's work there, she talks about how journaling is super important for patients. Well, isn't journaling just a form of evidence that you generate yourself? Where if you say, oh, my pain is better, I'm going to believe you right away. But I'm going to try to find out why. And I'm going to go into your journal and ask you, where did you see the change and at what dosage, with what dog doing what job did we use that? Because let's lock it down. If that's working, let's pay attention to that. Really important. Got to challenge that belief, too, that the high THC is sort of a necessary or maybe even optimal for treatment, for symptom relief. I have yet to find a THC-only user consuming high amounts of THC that is doing well. I don't see it. They may say I'm okay, but when we actually dig into it, they're not doing so well. All right, know your source, measure your medication. I don't have anything against how people had to get cannabis back in the old days. You know what? So did I. I had a person who was dying, and I had to try to find a way to relieve her symptoms. Back in 2001, 2002, you don't go to the store and buy some cannabis. Thankfully, places like Hillary Black had the Vancouver Compassion Club, wonderful woman there. She saved lives, really incredible work there. And so I would buy from there whenever possible. Most of it was just right off the street. Today, no. Know your source. Measure your medication, at least until you understand what's working, and then if you want to grow it yourself, that's totally fine. Just make sure it's clean. Make sure you're not adding anything that we didn't intend to add. Also, focus on treat the treatable with patience and persistence. See, Luke came in with a constellation of problems, physical, mental, all kinds of different issues. But start by treating something you can treat, and be patient with that, be persistent with that, and you'll see the results. You can move forward. So to give you a sense of what Luke's treatment regimen is in a little bit more detail, he did an interview for CBC Radio because, heck, we want to get the word out there. And he's one of these amazing people that is willing to share of his life and his story in order to make a difference. So let's hear what he said.
I take it several different ways. I take CBD oil twice a day. I also vaporize cannabis throughout the day. Depending on what time of day it is, depends on what I'm having. I don't really notice any high from it, and we kind of engineered it that way for me so that I do get the physical benefits of the THC without the psychoactive end of things, because I don't really want it affecting my life more than the pain already has.
Wow, I think a lot of people, if they were working in medicine and they heard a patient walk in like that, you'd probably say, okay. That sounds good. It sounds like there's some balance there. It sounds like things are working well, and we don't have that same concern. I'm spending $600 in high THC, and I'm acutely suicidal. Well, that's a very different kind of Luke on there now, explaining this. And you'll notice how the CBD was the baseline. The long-acting oral preparations were there. And CBD runs an interesting type of interference to work with THC in a sense of kind of impairing the binding, the duration and the ability to bind. It's a weak antagonist to the receptor. So it basically makes it so that folks that are using THC have a greater degree of control over the impairment and intoxication, but can still have some of the benefits of THC in terms of pain relief and perhaps some of the mood management, but it's not overdriven. It's very well controlled. It's just like driving the speed limit. You know, it's just more, okay, gets the job done, there we are, and that's perfect for this type of work. I always say medical cannabis is not sexy. It's not. It's not like, wow, it's, did it do the job for you? And if it did, great, carry on. Wonderful. So we all are trying to treat pain, but I'm gonna be really clear with you. I, years ago, stopped in my practice trying to go after pain. Instead, I said, tell me about all the modifiers that influence the perception of pain. Because as we learned in going through Michelle's talk here, actually, pain is a personal experience. It's generated, and she doesn't want to say it's all in your head. Well, where else could it be? That's where the brain is. All the impulses travel through the spinal cord to the brain, and they are interpreted before they are experienced. If anybody doubts that, a quick little experiment. Gonna put your thumb out, I'm gonna hit it with a book. And afterwards, I'm going to hand you a bill for $1,000 for the privilege of me banging on your thumb with that. Second scenario, I'm going to also hit your thumb with the book, but right afterwards, I'm going to hand you my winning lottery ticket. There you go. It's $10 million. You have it. Now, hang on a sec. It's the same sensory, same book, same signals coming from the thumb going, ow, but the brain goes, hey, you're $1,000 for hitting my thumb? That's like indignation, rage. And over here, like, well, I didn't like you a moment ago, but I thank you for the ticket. Now tell me, isn't that two completely different experiences of pain with the exact same sensory input? So let's be aware that there's so much, and in this case with Luke, it was mental health, and it was critically important that we treat his mental health issues, which is why the CBD approach was there. We know that at higher doses, this is behaving as a potent mood stabilizer. And if that's the case, we should probably work on that before we start trying to get him to do anything, because his mental state is driving his lack of motivation, his desire to get up and do things and get the jobs done. Now he's stuck within his own head before the pain has anything else to do. He can't escape his head. So really important. We had improvements in this.
Because I was chasing a high and I was having trouble getting to that high, and then the CBD took the high away, so there was nothing to chase anymore. So if I continue to try and chase something that's not there, I'm just throwing money away that I don't have. So no point. So I stopped.
Well, thank goodness he's very logical and reasonable, as you'd expect from a person who's working with engineers and, you know, giant industrial electrical installations where you make one move and everything explodes. So good to hear that his own evidence drove the changes in his treatment programming. He realized, I take CBD, it's helping, and I can't get high anymore because I take so much CBD that I'm going to stop chasing the high. And when he did that, things got a lot better for him. So, do you know, so remember he said it took 1.5 years for him to listen to me about CBD? Did you hear that? 1.5 years? It's okay, other people do that too. I'm like, hey, this thing's really great. And they're like, sure, Michael, I'll get back to you on that. And I'm like, that's okay. You just let me know. Let me know once you're there. Because I love the human laboratory. And I think it's important that each person, never mind the labs that give you the numbers, I ask the human laboratory, how are you doing? What did that do for you? What kind of job did that one do? So I'm always fascinated to learn the differences in how these things work for people. Now, I want to make sure that I wouldn't leave today without also putting on your dashboard something that I'm just so passionate about. And this is using non-impairing cannabis tools, including those acid forms of cannabinoids. Just to give you a real brief primer, when you grow a cannabis plant, it's not growing THC and it's not growing CBD. People do that. And nature, if you allow it to age, it will slowly change. But in the plant, you're dealing with a wide variety of different cannabinoids. But let's just talk about two of them. THCA is what a plant generates if it would all turn into THC. If you smoke that and you get really high, that plant doesn't have THC in it. It has THCA. And if you plucked it off the plant, fresh, threw it in the blender, and drank it, that might sound crazy and expensive, but here's the thing. It works. And for Luke, it was the critical piece between coping and getting back to work. So what we found was very interesting. As becoming growers, we had access to fresh cannabis. And we had the ability to take the equivalent of $50 to $100 worth of cannabis, throw it in the blender, and drink it every day, sometimes twice a day. And these non-impairing forms like CBDA turns into CBD when you heat it. The oil manufacturers, they heat their product and it converts it. It's called decarboxylation, but don't worry about it. Just basically knocks the A off and changes it from a non-activated, which does not work directly on the CB1 receptor, like THC and to a lesser extent CBD do. And we have this ability to use it in either very small doses, but also quite high doses, which unlike THC, Dr. McCallum was talking a little bit about dosing and what's effective in the guidelines, and I agree, I swear by that. I think low dose THC, not no dose, low dose, but in addition to that, combined with other aspects, including THCA and CBDA, they have this ability to stabilize a mind and a body like nothing else does. The reason we don't know about it is cost and access, because as Dr. Mitchell said, how long has all this been prohibited? And not just in the research world, but if you wanted to grow this plant, you were in a serious trouble. And now, today, we learned that plant you can grow in your backyard could make a tremendous difference in your ability to cope and function. And you don't have to be acutely ill or disabled to want to live better. The acid forms, I think, are a future target that will be used in the wellness market, because we're not dealing with the impairment side, and we're seeing some tremendous improvements in people's mental and physical health. So do take a look, do a Google search, get yourself involved in understanding about THCA and CBDA. I think they're essential pieces of the equation. And here's what Luke had to say about it.
Now, with it in raw form, that 8-hour period is now stretched out to a 24-hour period. I get the relief in my jaw and my neck and my shoulders. I can feel it letting go, but the intoxication aspect's not there.
Wow, doesn't that sound like a class of chemicals? You could work with relief on a 24-hour cycle, and he wasn't impaired. Because remember, in the beginning, it was like, I can't even wake up to go pick up my kids from the school. I don't even know where I am, what's going on. To him saying, I get relief 24 hours of the day, and I'm not impaired? Well, I would say we kind of tilted the balance over to where we needed to do to generate hope. Fascinating. Well, everybody, I'm really proud to say there's Luke today. Now, remember all those prognoses you read? The physiatrist, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, all these people say, I'm sorry, this man's not competitively employable, he's not going to work, he's not going to do the thing. And, well, look at that there. I think I see a guy suited up for work with a great big smile on his face. I'm like, Luke, you're on day one on this new job. I'm like, you got to take a picture of me, and I got to show everybody what you looked like on day one. And so he did. He just turned his phone around, snapped this, and sent it to me. I don't know if he knew I was going to put it in the presentations, but I do. But I'm just so happy to see that face, because you see that is the mission. That's the work we're all doing here together to try to take a situation from dire circumstances where we are in trouble to where we do the seemingly impossible. When a lot of great medical experts, very knowledgeable people, with the best of what they had, excluding cannabis, they were able to say, not this guy. I don't think it's going to work out. But through the work and some of the research that you've heard about today, some of the practical things that you've heard here today, this can happen in the most unlikely of circumstances. So really quickly, I was talking today about high-risk patients, the kinds who are just so heartbreaking to see, because you know they've been through so much by the time they've come to see you, and the truth is nobody really thinks they've got a lot of opportunity to get better. And these people often fall through the cracks. They're in polypharmacy, and they're in a terrible place, drawing on a tremendous number of resources without any appreciable improvement in how they're doing. Luke now is on no pharmaceuticals. We got rid of all of them. We got rid of all the psych meds. We got rid of all the painkillers. We got rid of the sleep medications. We got rid of the entire polypharmacy. And he was on long-term disability, and he has no long-term disability benefits anymore. It's off of all of that. But it started off with him being in a place where none of us want to be, and he brought himself out of that place. He made the changes, he made the commitments, he did the work, and because of that, we were able to make the move. Starting with CBD, which took a long time for him to say yes, but don't give up on people. Took a year and a half, but you know what? When he listened hard, and he made the changes in behavior, and that was his choice to go ahead and do that. It made a big difference, and it's often the place we start. Really, really important, but also pay attention to those acid forms. I do want to say, however, though, this is a case study, and it's what we call an N of 1 study, which in cannabis is probably a more accepted form of research. I'll leave that more to the research folks to sort of speak to that. But when I talk to research folks, I go like, I'm doing like N of 1 studies all the time. And they go, don't worry about that. In cannabis research, it's far more important to understand what it's like for that person. And that's what matters, because pain is incredibly subjective. And how do we assess pain? How is your pain? So I don't think it's a problem to use an N of 1 study when we're speaking with the person and we're asking, has this made a difference for you? So don't fear the fact that we don't have necessarily all the double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. And there's good reason for that. Dr. Mitchell went over the prohibition, and now we know why, and we're working on it. But I just don't think it's necessary for us to go too deep into all of that. I'd say get involved with something like Caroline's research and find out about what the current clinical guidelines are for this. And let's get to work. So I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to do that. This is actually my work in the cannabis laboratory. I work in raw an awful lot, so I'm always in there with the plants, and that juice, I drink that, hey? See that green juice right there? That's an amazing plant that I grow called ACDC. It's primarily a CBDA plant, and when you drink it in that raw form, in that size of a dose, like it's a whopping dose, but for an entire day, you have no anxiety symptoms. As I'm here on the stage today with you, I had one of these raw shakes this morning, knowing full well that I'd be standing up in front of a group of people, and I wanted to give you my best. I wanted to make sure that I was living what we were talking about in the presentation. For me, it provides the ability for my brain to go, shh, it's okay. And just carry on with things. Because I don't know if you're anything like me, but your head can start to say things where you're like, oh my God, what if they don't like you? What about this? And actually at the end of it, things turn out all right. So thank you all for being here and for listening to this and being a part of the answer. You guys inspire us all to keep going and doing what we do. So thank you very much for that. And I'll take some questions, just one or two if we've got time. 5 minutes? Okay.
Thanks very much, Michael. I saved all my questions for one, apparently. The population, like someone mentioned earlier, that I work with is they're primarily on fixed incomes, primarily, pain mixed with mental health. It's an older adult population. Many people have been suffering a very long time. So I'm wondering, like, Luke's story is impressive, but he obviously had the advantage of a year and a half of psychotherapy before he even introduced the cannabinoids into his regimen. And we don't have time in primary care to be their psychotherapist. And so I'm wondering how do you see those stories playing out without that advantage?
That's an excellent question. I'm so glad you asked that. There's no doubt that when a person has access to a more complete set of care, that we have more options for things we can do. Though I'll tell you that if we had the ability on day one to actually chemically stabilize Luke with CBD, if he would have just listened like from the beginning, and we would have been able to say, listen, we have a formulary for this. And we looked at Dr. Mitchell talking about the different guidelines of which line we would put cannabis on. If cannabis was on that first line, and we could say, listen, we do need some psychotherapy, but perhaps we don't need a year and a half of therapy if we can start you off with a proper regimen that will stabilize you mentally, chemically, just like we hope psych meds will do, but all too often they're in a very small percentage of people who respond well to it. We know that it's a small amount. So what I'm really saying is that if we had access to it being okay, and perhaps even going beyond it's okay, but it's recommended that we start with cannabinoid-based therapies on line 1 for both mental health and physical situations, patients would be far better off as far as I'm concerned. But right now, if you saw all the medications you have to go through to get to line 3 before you're kind of sort of okay, I guess, to go after cannabis. So to your point, my population is selected for severity. So people that are coming here are that 9 or 10 out of 10, which come along with motor vehicle accident claims, which usually have an insurance company attached to them. And there's a liability there to help this person. But I would argue that in a more primary care setting, if we had access to cannabinoid-based tools and they were part of formularies and they were available, there's so much more we could do to perhaps improve the efficacy of mental health treatments. Then we would be able to do things in a much shorter period of time. We'd be able to, as you saw with Luke was managing his own treatment protocol. First, without enough support, and secondarily, you heard him as all confidence. I got this. I take care of me every day. So in this model, patients, after receiving a small amount of targeted support with the right chemical agents and perhaps some brief therapy, people would be able to implement the hopes of things like cognitive behavioral therapy because you'd be able to reduce chemically the incidence of triggering. So we know that there's a dose-dependent relationship in terms of the mental stability, the absence of anxiety that can come from using CBD. And I would argue, as we start to study the acid forms, both THCA and CBDA have profound mood-stabilizing properties to them as well, without impairment. And if we can chemically stabilize a person on far less impactful or harmful medications with tolerable side effect profiles and the ability to engage with your life and be more functional, then I think that we would see that the adjunct therapies that we're adding, whether they're biomechanical therapies or psychological therapies, that we would do so much more with so much less output. So the answer really lies in really petitioning for access and to move these cannabinoid-based therapies out of the basement of the treatment guidelines and get them out to the front door. And I know there's work to be done by that, and that's part of why we have these discussions, to say, does it matter? Yes. It may save lives to have cannabinoids move to the front line, and quite the opposite we know is true when the traditional medications that are there are sitting in its place. So great question, I fully agree with you, but in this case, I think having the right cannabis-based therapies might reduce the need. Yeah.
Thanks. My follow-up to that is, I appreciate you mentioning the Compassion Club. I understand they don't fit very well in the current legal space, and I'm wondering, can we access products through them for our patients who would fit their criteria, even though many of our patients won't leave the North Shore, never mind Kamloops?
One of the real fumbles that's happened in legalization has been the ability to be able to provide medicine to those most desperately in need and to remove the barriers so that those folks can get what they need. And it may be a matter of saving lives, which is why the urgency is there and to do this. So what I would kind of look at is this. When we talk about removing the barriers, we need to identify those barriers. Some are cost, some are the right medication, some are simple accessibility to proximity to get these types of things. And that's what makes it really challenging. It seems as almost there's a gap between the existing model, which works well for some patients with means, and for the patients that have really no means, they're not able to buy from the licensed production model at all. They don't have the residences, they don't have the incomes, they don't have necessarily the payment methods required, they may not have a fixed address. Look, that system isn't designed for them. But I'm asking, in support of your question, what system is set up for them? And when it comes down to the right of a patient to receive effective medical care, if they're in a bracket where their income is insufficient to even meet some of the generous programs, I will say, like some of the licensed producers do offer even like 30% discount. Well, now under the Constitution, you have some rights. And one of those rights is to be able to use cannabis in a form that is deemed most acceptable to you and your physician. So what that means is, for a medical patient, over these last years, if a topical worked for you, it was not illegal for you to source the materials and make your own topicals. Why? Because if your physician said, are topicals helping? Yep, keep doing it. The Constitution says, well, you have a right to keep using topicals, so go for it. We won't get involved. So that's a bit of the area in which I'd like to see this go, but what I'd like to know is what additional rights do patients without the means, what special rights do they have to be able to access cannabis when the tree, the fruit on the tree is too high to reach? Now, why is there no model for apples that fall off the tree? And then we can give that apple to somebody in need. And this is something I'm really passionate about. And if you want to take the discussion a bit offline, I'd be very interested in talking to you a little bit about how farmers and how local patients are just doing a little bit of compassionate work to support people to do the good work we know we need to do. So some of this is about accessing LP models to be able to access their programs for compassionate care. Those are excellent models, and for a lot of people, it does get them to the profile where they're like, okay, I have enough budget for this, and it does work. And so for those patients, I'm happy. They're happy. They have a Health Canada approved process, medication that's measured, that's tested, and they have a CRA write-off. So they can reduce the burden of the impact of those medications on their overall income. It's not perfect, but it certainly is a lot better than nothing. I don't think patients should be taxed. I think that's a tremendous fumble on the legal system to add the additional burden of taxes and to treat the so-called recreational user and the medical user as identical users. I think we're missing that piece at the recreational store level. That's not a recreational store. It's a store with lawful products that if a patient walks in, they're treated as though they're not a patient, even though the medication is identical to what they'd buy otherwise. So the system is in work. It's still in phase 1, heading now into phase 2, and I hope to see these types of things. But your advocacy, your voice in saying we need to do better is exactly the kind of voice we need to hear, and I certainly applaud you for it. It's great advocacy. Okay, we're gonna wrap this up. We're gonna do one more quick short break, and then I can't wait to bring onto the stage Robert Gora. Now, it's not just any sort of licensed producer we brought to the stage here, but one that grows organically and regeneratively. Cannabis has a bit of a dirty secret in that it's very impactful to the planet when it's grown hydroponically, when it's grown where all the salts are fed into it, and then those salts leach into the water systems, and there's effluent that's a problem, and so much waste, so much garbage, so much being thrown away in the industry to produce medicine to help people. And what I really love about this and why I'm so grateful to have Robert come up to the stage here just after a short, quick bathroom break we'll take. And he'll tell you about how not only the system works, which is good. I think a lot of us are maybe uneducated or underinformed about what the lawful system is, and I want everyone to know about that. But also, don't we have a climate crisis? And did you know that regenerative farming is a carbon sink and is a net benefit to the planet? So stick around and catch that, because that is something that's important to all of us, and also some really great insights from a company that I believe is at a higher standard. So let's learn a little bit about that. Thank you all. We're going to take a quick break, grab another cookie, stretch real quick, and then we're going to sit right back down. We got one last presentation to go, and we're going to knock it out of the park here. Thank you.